Okay, live once again. Um, and in this live stream, I want to expand on some of the previous ideas and concepts that I discussed in the last few live streams about internal arts and some of the various underlying healing mechanics. Because this is something that always and still does to this day, but definitely when I first started was very mysterious to me. Meaning, I would read books or hear things about healing benefits of internal arts. And then I would look at the movement and I'm like, how does that create these changes? How does that create these transformations? And I really wanted to understand the actual cause and effect relationships. And actually, I was kicked out of a um, internal arts school many, many years ago for basically asking so many questions and more or less pointing out that what they were advertising wasn't actually happening, meaning they were actually missing a lot of the internal components. I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't really know what I was doing or why I was asking. I just had the sense that something was missing and something more should be happening. And then eventually that led to me getting kicked out, which then that led me to finding better teachers. So I'll do this because in the last live stream, people were asking, how can you distinguish something that's really useful versus something that's just kind of a waste of time? And this can be very difficult at the beginning because you don't obviously have experience and you don't have skill and you don't really have much of a strong interface between the mind and the body. So then things are still kind of very vague or very mysterious. Whereas at a certain point, things become a lot more tangible. You know a lot more accurately whether or not things are occurring or what is occurring. So basically what I'll talk about here is the underlying elemental qualities of internal arts and then how those produce healing benefits and then what that actually means. And then how this is different than basically everything that everyone else is doing most of the time. It's different than just trying to line up the skeleton or, fixation with modern anatomy, which is where, a lot of yoga and other things are now. They think it's all about skeleton and lining up the bones and getting the muscles and pushing this back here and pulling this up here and squeezing this and pulling that. And a lot of these different things, which not knocking it, there are some amazing things and people are doing great work in those arenas. I'm just pointing out that it's very different. It's a very different approach than what I am going to be talking about. It's a very different approach than internal arts, internal arts that are adhering to the e-ginging process. That would, it's very different than what they would do. So it's different than, fixation on the skeleton or modern anatomy. It's not visualization. It's obviously different than like normal cardio and weightlifting and normal mechanics that people to move their bodies. It's not intuitive. It's not vague. It's not subjective. It's not abstract. It's not subtle. It's basically the opposite of what everyone tends to think, at least initially, which fair enough. It's completely understandable because it's not really an easy endeavor. It's not very obvious. Um, it's not a very easy thing to understand unless someone has actually broken it down and you've actually gone through some of the developmental processes to make those things real. Then it becomes something totally different. So because of there was a decent amount of positive feedback from previous live streams that I've done, I'm considering offering private sessions or an online course. And I've had a few people reach out to me and talk about those things. So if there's enough people interested in either of those, then I'll put together something to start teaching some of these things in a more practical, realistic way and bridge it from just theoretical and philosophical to actual, like, here's how to do it, here's practices, here's how to start the process. I just don't really feel comfortable doing that for free on YouTube because there's so many different ways in which it can go wrong. And the fact of the matter is most people will get it wrong because that's just the nature of learning anything, is that if you don't know how to do it and you try to do it based on all of your prior experience, it's probably going to be wrong. So you need someone there to help tell you and correct you. Or, if you just want to go off in your own rabbit hole and waste time and energy and precious life, then for sure. But personally speaking, as someone who's wanting to share that, I just don't feel comfortable putting that kind of thing publicly for free on the internet for anyone to just look at any time without making sure that they've gone through the prior steps before that and have the right context for that. So that's why I'm thinking some kind of private sessions or some kind of just online class. So, anyways, now getting to the actual meat of what I want to talk about, which is the elemental qualities, which various internal arts would contain, but then of course express or interact with in unique ways depending on their goals. These things which actually produce the legitimate healing benefits or legitimate internal change. Because if we're talking about an internal art, that means we should want something that will create and lead to lasting, genuine internal changes, meaning between the skin and the bone, everything between there will be transformed and changed to hopefully a higher degree of efficiency in whatever processes that it's going through. And ultimately, with all the internal arts, that's the goal, increasing the efficiency of whatever system that we are working with, which then that just that simple thing alone can lead to a lot of different things because of what we typically associate as normal for health and for human functioning is extremely low. What's possible for human functioning is quite a lot higher than we really imagine, and really doesn't even necessarily require anything particularly esoteric to go to these higher levels of functioning and higher levels of efficiency. So the first thing is that understanding the distinction of localized regions and how different regions have different effects and govern different processes in the body. And then if you change the tissue quality in that region or create space and expansion in that region, you can create a knock on effect for the processes and the systems which are governed by that region. So examples would be the lungs would be kind of this region here, which there are magnetic fields which sit in this region which govern metal or lung. And then obviously the center of the chest is heart or fire. And then the middle of the solar plexus is earth, which would be like digestive processes and centralized stability within the system. And then at the base of the spine, lower back, pelvis area would be kidneys or water, which is another field that sits there. And then on the side of basically where the diaphragm sits in the rib cage would be the liver region. So there's these different regions in the body where if you want to affect change across that system, you could then affect that region. But then also a lot of times you can look at the quality in that region and know the knock-on level of vitality or health or disease of that region. For example, if someone's, ribs and their liver and their diaphragm are really wound up and really constricted, it's pretty much a surefire bet that their liver system and liver functioning and wood elemental system is probably also not functioning as well as it could. If someone's pericardium in the center of their chest is all constricted and withdrawn, you can pretty much assume with a high degree of accuracy, obviously taking other things into consideration, but in a general sense, that the systems associated with that region are probably not functioning too well. Same thing with the low back, which is why if you read about kidneys, which is the most common thing people read about when they get into Chinese medicine, it's kind of like low back pain, knee pain, hip pain, joint pain, those things of that nature. Because basically, what happens is when the elasticity and the springiness and the expansive quality is diminished in that region of the body, everything just kind of starts to compress and drop in. So then you get low back pain because of compression, you get hip pain because of compression, you get sexual dysfunction because of compression. Then that creates misalignments in the body that then throws the knees and the ankles out of alignment, which then that creates all of these other cascading effects. But that's all coming from the quality of the tissues in that region. And then that just creates a knock on effect. Um, so that's kind of the first thing to understand in terms of understanding the medicinal side of different arts and how it has really nothing to do with like acupuncture channels or meridians in the normal sense. And anytime you see people trying to say like yoga or qigong or tai chi or anything is using the acupuncture channels, they're already lost because it's not really the functionality and it's not really the way in which things are working. So, which is fair because, the vast majority of people are just kind of fumbling in the dark, trying to grab literally anything that they can that might have some kind of validity or explanation because they don't understand how these things work, which I totally get. That's what I'm trying to kind of change a little bit. So that's the first thing is understanding these localized regions and the overall like tissue quality and expansive force in those areas. And how that could get specifically broken down if we talked about each of the elemental qualities, which in Chinese thought we're talking about metal, earth, water, wood, and fire, which are not even element is kind of the wrong word because when we think of element, we refer to more like the Western states of matter, like earth, air, water, fire, which it's just a shitty translation of it's more like processes or phases, I think are better, or pulses, or yeah, expressions. Maybe those are better terms than elements, but I'm just using elements because that's the nomenclature, that's the common term that people are associated with, but it's really not a great word. So the elemental qualities of earth, metal, water, fire, and wood, right? And how modulating and changing these elemental qualities in the body can then create knock on health benefits, which then create knock on transformations in the mind, which then creates more health, which then creates more balance. So, going through these processes within myself is really what has informed and what does inform my overall perspective and why I think so many things are more or less destined for failure. This process is why I arrived at those opinions and arrives at those point of views and why so many things are just straight up obvious and apparent to me because I actively engaged with those and still am those elemental processes within the body, which then creates that creates a knock-on effect in the mind and gives you some degree of small insight from your own real experience. So, breaking down each of the elemental qualities within the body in a very general sense, we could spend hours on each one. And if you want to learn more about it, you can just look at, the Chinese five element system and get a general idea and a general overview for what I mean. So, as it relates to the metal element, so lungs and large intestine and their associated functions. Again, as I mentioned, it has to do really with this region, with the fields up here, because around this area of the chest. So, creating the quality of the sternum basically releasing and dropping down, and then starting to pressurize the um, lower cavity, the lower abdomen, the more strongly and efficiently that quality is anchored into the body would be the more that that system would become healthier. So like people's breathing will get deeper naturally, their nervous system will relax, trauma will start leaving their body, fluid metabolism will improve, all of the associated functions of the metal element will improve because of this force or quality that is installed into the body and then imprinted and ingrained and practiced over time. So realistically speaking, if I do this now for myself, I'm relaxed. But then so I just do it and then basically already as a result of just relaxing that area, I don't know how much is even obvious or perceivable based on my shitty background and black outfit. But basically, what's happening is my rib cage is expanding, my diaphragm is dropping down, my neck and my spine are opening up, and I'm sitting more upright naturally without trying because there's a force or a pressure that's going down through my chest, pushing into my lower abdomen and causing my whole spine and whole abdominal cavity and thoracic cavity to like expand outwards. And if I release it, I just go back to where I was before. So that would be kind of like the elemental quality of the metal element and how you would install that. And that would be through training the release of certain areas and also getting the shoulders and the scapulus to properly sit on the rib cage to basically act like a container. Because what happens is like when that container and that downward pressure isn't there, things shoot up into the head. So you get stress, anxiety, tension, shortness of breath, um, poor fluid metabolism, and things tend to get tight and stagnant all the way up through here, especially as the metal element and it relates to the nervous system and how that relates to like trauma and emotional things. That really all gets kind of caught and bound up in this area. So if that process initiates, it can start to naturally, just as a byproduct, unwind those things, especially if you combine it with a few other qualities, but just keeping it general. So that's like the metal element kind of thing. And then what's the next one? So we could talk about the earth. So earth, again, would be the central region in kind of the solar plexus area between your rib cage. Um, and how someone would generally want to tonify that and initiate and engage with that with an internal arts is being able to hang the muscles off of the bone, which is pretty much exactly like it sounds. You mentally pin the bones in space and then you relax and release the muscles off of it. And then that starts to create an unbinding, and then that creates kind of a process of unbinding and getting your tissues from being all glued together and from being glued to the bone and all wound up. Um, and then once you initiated that, then you would start dropping your mass and releasing mass through it to stress that system. And that would then kind of change the tissue quality of your flesh. So like all the soft muscly stuff. Oh yeah, sorry about that. All the soft muscly stuff on your body would start to expand out and rehydrate and kind of expand out off of your bone and become pretty soft and malleable. Like if I feel all the tissues around my body, it's all very soft and malleable. I can kind of just like grab it and move it around and get in, and it's not all stuck together. But at the same time, if I relax and release it, it becomes like extremely firm and hard just from relaxing it. It presses and pushes off the bone. Um, so that would be part of the earth kind of quality. And then basically the flesh is kind of what would help to keep your system upright. And then um, the more there's an expansive quality in that system, the more like an anti-gravity effect starts to happen. So gravity starts to go through your soft tissue matrix, wetsuit, whatever you want to call it, instead of into your joints and into your bones. And then the more the wetsuit expands out is the more it kind of pulls the bones apart, pulls your vertebra apart, pulls everything apart and starts to get rid of contraction in your skeleton. Which if you think about it, why do people have joint problems? Because of this, because of squishing, because the mass of their body is going into their joints and going into their bones instead of going into the wetsuit as it's supposed to, because the wetsuit can handle it. And if it has that expansive quality, then it can basically be buoyant. And then the more it gets stressed, the more it pushes out and expands. Which, if you think about it, if you look at old people, usually they're pretty squished in and dehydrated and decrepit. And if they fall, they're brittle and things break and shatter, and their joints wear out because of years of just gravity going into them. So that's where you can get a really strong rejuvenation effect. Personally speaking, I used to have a lot of knee pain, a lot of hip pain, a lot of compression in my pelvis from, kidney deficiency and years of just sitting at a desk. Um, but like now my pelvis feels as though it's getting pushed apart from the inside. And then my acetabulum or whatever, the head of the femur is getting pushed out, and that whole area is getting pushed out. So that means naturally when I get up and move around, my whole system just feels much more anti-gravity, and the effect isn't just, or the gravity isn't just pummeling into my joints anymore. So just dodged, years of pain down the line from changing that quality. So metal, earth, now wood. Wood would be technically called the tendons, um, but it's not really. Again, it's not the tendons literally. It's more so a certain quality of the flesh, which feels very tendony, which has a certain degree of engagement and real strength and spring and buoyancy to it, um, which would have a lot of the effects that I just talked about, but it would have more of a strong outward pressure, and remove. Basically, with that system, you really want to have the diaphragm area and the liver energy in general be able to move outwards, because that's the natural movement of that pulse or that element. And if you think about this, why do people get angry? Why do they get frustrated? Because they feel constrained. Like, constraint is basically the one of the main enemies of like the liver system. So in terms of how that would modulate within internal arts, it's getting the balance of the quality of engaging the tendons, and hanging the flesh and stimulating the flesh, as I just talked about. It's kind of modulating the balance between those two things, which would then create that knock-on effect to kind of put that spring and buoyancy and that ease of outward movement back into the tissue matrix. Because if you think about it like this, they always they always, or classically they use the image of like a drum skin, meaning if you want to have a drum to conduct the sound, it needs to be pulled taut in order to conduct. If it's too slack and you hit it, it's just nothing. If it's too tight and you hit it, it'll eventually shatter. So it's kind of a similar idea in terms of getting the right stretch, the right pull, and the right elasticity within the tissues to have the most degree of conductivity. So what happens is if things are too constrained, too tight, too dry, too bound up, it just doesn't really conduct. So you would call that chi stagnation or blockage, basically, because things are just not really able to flow and move through properly. Or if it's pulled way too tight and way too tense, then again, constriction. Or if it's just really deficient and weak, then same thing, not going to be conductive. So that's kind of the idea of the balancing the earth and yeah, exactly, like break a string. It's kind of like a guitar as well. And so that's metal, earth, wood, and now fire. So fire would be just getting the quality of being able to move the blood, which the thing is, when you get the liver, when you get these other things in place, blood will automatically start moving more appropriately. Because why it's not is usually because of some stagnation or restriction. And typically, when when your body is unbinding and unwinding, you will get irrationally sweaty for like no reason. Like you're just sitting still or standing still, but you're just pouring sweat. Why are you pouring sweat? Because all the tissue layers are unbinding, and all the stuck fluid and stuck blood and stuck nervous tension is starting to unwind, and your body's just releasing heat, releasing inflammation, releasing whatever as things kind of unbind. And it makes no sense. You're just sitting there. Or like just doing Tai Chi sometimes for like 2 minutes, and I'll be like drenched in sweat. And it makes no sense because I just like moved my arms and my body around a little bit, and it's just pouring sweat. Why? Because all the layers and everything over the bone is moving around and shifting and creating a lot of internal movement, which is very different than what most people are typically doing. But it's the type of thing that arises naturally when you start to install these different elemental qualities that I'm talking about. Because without them, what are you really doing? Maybe just doing choreography, maybe just breathing, maybe just visualizing or whatever. Okay, I mean, that's cool. That's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. It just doesn't necessarily create the degree of internal change that I'm personally interested in. Um, so yeah, in terms of the fire element, moving blood, having a sense of expansiveness in the yang qi, and then your awareness, and then really a lot of it would be activating the lower dantian to create much more activity through the system. Um, and then also too for that, sometimes just cardio is the best thing. Cardio is the best thing to do to just straight up move your blood and move things around. Which internal arts are not necessarily the best because internal arts can be make you very strong, make you very healthy, but doesn't necessarily make you very fit. Although oddly enough, I just notice my strength and my fitness tend to automatically go up from getting these qualities in place automatically. It's an interesting thing. Okay, then the last thing was the water element, which is kidney system and really getting a sense of consolidation and it, yeah, consolidation, density, and solidness in the tissues in basically the lumbar region and the pelvis and the hips, basically from like the diaphragm to the pelvis, that little area, and then a little bit further back it would be kind of the water region. So that again relates back to the releasing of the chest and getting things sinking down because the kidneys and the water and the metal, the kidneys and the lungs are really intertwined in those systems. Basically, if you get those things going, that is really can be quite beneficial. Plus, with learning to open up the qua and the inside of the hips and then get your mass and your pressure to stimulate the kidney one region of the foot, the front part of the foot. Basically, that pressurizing that region can start to create expansion in kind of, yeah, it creates expansion in the foot, which then starts to make its way up through the ankle, through the knee, through the hips, through, the pelvis, through the low back, and it starts to just create again another sense of expansiveness and anti-gravity effect in the body, but a slightly different quality than some of the other things that I've mentioned before. Um, and that would be really one way to get that going. So yeah, that's all five elements. And each of those things are hours and hours of practice and exploration within themselves. But it's some of the ways in which doing internal arts, putting that into your system actually creates the benefits and the internal transformation and a lot of the things that people talk about versus if you don't have them, then they won't really create those effects and those benefits. Why? Uh, because I mean, it's in the words, it's in the definition, it's in the system. Everything I just listed, if you go read about even Chinese medicine, understanding of the elements, everything I just talked about is in the directional quality, the elemental quality, the tissue systems of all of those things. So it's like if you're working with those systems directly, making them more efficient and putting in the correct qualities, by definition, you would improve them. By also definition, if you're not doing those things, then you won't improve them. Like that's just simple logic. And on the flip side, if you're putting in the wrong qualities, you'll make them worse. Like, see, if the thing is, if people are just doing like, oh, I'm going to do internal arts, 10 minutes a week, and that's going to be cool. Okay, fine. It doesn't matter. But if people start to put in hours and start to actually practice it and they're doing it in the wrong way, they will make their body worse because they're feeding back wrong qualities to their system. Like if they're doing this, soft, limpy, old person Tai Chi, right? Which is if you're an old person and that's what you do, okay, fine, sure. But basically, if you're doing that, you're just putting that system, you're putting that feedback back into your system, which is going to weaken all of your systems. So it's also commonly why you see seasoned internal arts practitioners always get fat and they get bellies and they act like it's a chi belly, but usually it's just spleen deficiency because their system can't process fluid properly, so they gain weight, or they have a lot of digestive stagnation, or they're using too much force or whatever, so they create stagnation in the body. And I know that hurts some people's feelings, and that's not my intention. I'm just pointing out simple cause and effect relationships based on the theory and the philosophy and the cosmology of the systems that I'm speaking about. Which, if that's problematic, then don't do these systems. Do something else. Uh, so I don't know. That just really confuses me that people would have an issue with it. And I just it reminds me of when I made videos about this and outlined basically what I just did, all these different mechanics, and talked about how that was, in my opinion, vastly superior to visualization and imagination to such a degree that I thought that would be obvious and implicit or explicit to anyone being like, oh, yeah, like if I just visualize myself lifting weights, that's kind of delusional versus if I actually went to the gym and lifted weights. That's kind of the degree that I laid it out. But then still people in the comments were like, you're mean, you don't know what you're talking about. People who visualize and imagine and do imagination might have powers beyond what you can even consider. And I'm like, with some certain degree of mental illness and strict adherence to incorrect information, there's nothing you can really do for people. So I just kind of chose to not engage. But this is the degree in which people sometimes operate. So I'm just trying to present what I think is valuable and useful. What has been profoundly helpful and useful for me and has helped me completely change the entire um, functioning of my system and get rid of so much pain, correct a bunch of structural imbalances, like heal myself of a bunch of things that I tried for decades. I tried for so long to do and spent so much time and money doing and failing. So that's kind of what I'm doing and what I'm trying to share. And so I wanted to break down these different elemental things because what happens is when when these elemental qualities or these various processes or mechanics are put into your body, that will then create a knock-on effect to your mind, meaning parts of your psyche will start to balance out. Your parts of your emotional reaction will balance out. Traumas will go away. Habits will go away. Just your system will start to just self-regulate, which to me, that's what holistic healing is and should be for. So then I get confused when I put out the actual mechanics and processes and path and A, B, C, D, E, G for that, or E, F, G, um, for holistic healing. And people are like, no, that's wrong. Um, okay, well, to each their own. So basically, yeah, you balance these things in the body, and then the mind will start to automatically regulate as a byproduct. Because every day, in some ways, this is what we're doing. Over time, through the course of our life, we started to prefer certain ways of looking at the world, certain emotional lenses, whether it was anger, frustration, resentment, or worry, or fear, or one of these lenses. And then basically that is underlying operating in the background all the time. So then that changes the actual functioning of our physiology via conditioning how the tissues work and how they are shaped, which that makes our body more efficient and effective at whatever that mental quality or personality trait that we've been developing. So our system just gets really good at that, which I mean can be awesome if we are really healthy and balanced. uh, Great, don't worry about it. But if a lot of people aren't, or maybe they want more efficiency, then they have to interject and intersect or with that process to create different changes and change the different qualities, which is why these things take time and why they're difficult and not easy. Because if you think you're just going to go to a class for 10 minutes, once a week, and it's going to override 30 years of conditioning, I think that's maybe not unrealistic. I think that's an unrealistic expectation. Perhaps, maybe there might be the lucky person, but realistically speaking, it's going to take time and energy and skill and refinement to start to override these things. Um, so yeah, that's just how are shaped and how this process is always occurring to varying degrees of efficiency. And most of the time, it's most of the time the process we're running is emotional distortion, leaking of chi, still stimulating and stirring the jing, and just leading us closer to death. That's the natural, normal process that we're all engaged in, because that's just normal part of life. We're born and we die, and our jing is carrying us from A to B. That's normal. That's natural. So when people say things about internal arts and cultivation being natural, it's actually the opposite. It's completely unnatural, because what's natural is to just live according to all of your pre-existing conditioning and experience, get efficient and effective as possible at embodying those qualities, and then die and be addicted to everything in your senses and just live according to your base desires and then die. That's old. I mean, it's obviously a gross oversimplification, but that's what's normal and natural. So if you're going to try to go against any of those things, you're automatically unnatural. It's automatically normal. There's automatically probably going to be some degree of conflict, because your system is going to want to hold on to those things. Even though those things might be horrible for you, your system will still prefer it because it's comfortable, because it's normal, because it doesn't want to go through the sense of loss that it will experience through releasing those things, even though they might be terrible or negative. So that's a bit of a conundrum and a quandary and a paradox that I definitely have not fully figured out. It just seems to be something that's really built into humans. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that more intermediate levels, once a person has, opened up their body and mobilized things to a pretty decent degree, and they've thickened their chi to a degree, and they've established a lot of these processes, then at a certain point people can modulate and change their internal environment just from changing their mental quality. And then the whole mind body connection thing takes on a whole other different kind of ball of wax. um, because basically what happens is, the more through various practices you build these qualities in the body, eventually they can just kind of be triggered through thought alone, because you've built those pathways. So you just think, I'm going to do this, and then it will occur. Like for me, for example, I spent time practicing just cycling through different tissue layers. Like, now I'll think nerves, now I'll think blood, now I'll think skin, now I'll think fascia, now I'll think flesh, now I'll think bones. And then awareness penetrating and interfacing with all those different tissue layers, and feeling the quality of what's there based on that region, and just kind of being able to play around and cycle around through those different things. um, or if I'd want to, I don't know, any of the qualities that I just mentioned now can be sort of accessed just through, like, oh, this quality, and then boom, starts to come through, rather than all of the prior stuff that I had to go through to build up that kind of somatic trigger. So then now that can be built on and used and moved and gone and progressed further into different things. And obviously still going back and correcting and improving errors, because can definitely always be more efficient, and definitely have a lot of room to grow, and a lot of errors to correct still in myself, a lot of inefficiencies to get rid of. So, anyways, I just wanted to go on and talk about and share those different qualities, and um, give a little more of a concrete illustration and example of some of the healing benefits that I talked about, because I talked about lengthening in a couple of videos, and that is mixed in with all of these different things. You just kind of can pick and choose the system that you want to interact with. Like, as an example, I've had times where I can move my blood at will consciously, um, where I've had times where I'll be sitting on the couch, and within a few minutes, I'll be hot and sweaty, but I'm not moving. How did I do that? I just moved my blood, and I was literally hot and sweaty, and I was not before, and I was sitting in an air-conditioned room. Um, Although I don't have the ability to do that all the time on command. Sometimes I have to be, at least for me now, it's easier at the end of the later in the day once I've already been up and blood's already moving and things are already going around. But I think that's just other things that I need to correct in my system. But that's definitely been a thing. I did that with my liver a few times where I sucked the blood into the liver and then pushed it out. That was like at night before I was going to bed. And then how I'm confident or at least guessing that that's what actually occurred is two things. First is I was laying in bed and I got quite hot and sweaty, and that whole area just kind of relaxed. My diaphragm relaxed. I felt a lot different. I felt more relaxed. I fell asleep shortly thereafter. And the next morning, my elimination was a lot larger, which all of those things indicate, okay, maybe I actually did did move things in and out of the out of the liver. But we'll see. Uh, as I'm choking and dying. I guess maybe I'm not supposed to be talking about this stuff publicly, but just giving an idea. Yeah. So, anyways, lastly, depending on if there's demand or people are interested, I'm happy to do private sessions with people or possibly put together an online course or something that people can go through on their own pace to start learning these things and then be able to have feedback and corrections and guidance from me. So a few people have already reached out and said they wanted that. So we'll see if there's enough demand, then I'll probably do it. If not, but we'll see. Okay, so that's all I had planned. I'll answer questions for a bit if there are any, and then I'll probably wrap it up soon so it's not going on too long. I alternated 30 minutes of Wuji with 1 hour of 5 elements for 3 weeks and forgot about my hip pain, like you said it would before. That's great. Definitely good to hear, especially if you can really work the quad and get the quad open and get the hip bone to drop. Like if you can pin the pelvis and drop the hips out of it, that can be helpful, and then get the quad to really expand. That, at least for me, that really helped out my hips, especially when the hip drops out and pressurizes the tibia into the ankle and to kidney one. That creates like a return pressure, which at least for me pushed my hips and my pelvis out apart, and also made them really hot and sweaty and a lot of shaking and a lot of release in that area. So definitely if you can get that going, that would be very cool. Um, so yeah, glad to hear that, even though I don't know who you are or any of your background in this kind of thing. What about the pulse that can come and go in different regions? I guess you're meaning like the pulse from the 5 element sequence, like the heart going out or the lungs coming in or the, I don't know, whatever the other ones are that you can feel. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's definitely a thing, but I don't know if feeling the pulse itself is that useful or beneficial. It's sometimes, I mean, I've felt things before, but it's just, like I said, at least in my limited experience, sensations and pulses and whatever, it's kind of a day by day kind of thing. At least the way I try to look at it is just use the physicality in the body and these markers more so than, you know, other subtle things, but kind of choose your own adventure and figure out for yourself. Have you ever had a shy bladder? I'm guessing this bodily transformation would take care of that. Yeah, I think that shy bladder thing is maybe just more psychologically speaking and more of like a nervousness. But yeah, I mean, I think if you strengthen the water element in the kidney system, then it would have a knock on effect on the bladder and help it be more relaxed and not so fearful and anxious. Because definitely within the kidney system, there can be a lot of underlying kind of fear and contraction. And that is something that I have experienced quite a lot in my life. So I'm very familiar with that quality. So yeah, I just wanted to share and talk about these things just to illustrate and try to reiterate that these things, it's not subtle, it's not subjective, it's not imaginary, it's not vague, it's not abstract, it's not based on just, you know, aligning your bones or some anatomical thing. It's not visualization, it's not weightlifting, it's not something that necessarily anyone can just show up and actually do. um, it's all very different. How the theory of Tai Chi looks at physical exercises such as push ups and working with weights or aerobic exercises. I mean, basically, the way I've been taught is you need some degree of physical fitness, some basic, strength from, push ups or body weight exercises. Typically, lifting weights is contraindicated for internal arts until a person has completely changed and transformed their inner terrain so that their body operates under inner mechanics. Then you can add weights back on. I'm not fully sure that I've actually done that yet, so I'm not doing weights. And I'll wait till a bit later to do that until I'm absolutely sure that I've fully done that. But basically, yeah, doing push-ups and sit-ups is really what what you would want to do just to have some strength, but nothing too insane or too crazy. Basically, people have to make a decision at a certain point whether how they want to build and condition their body. Because if you're lifting weights and doing all these things and you're trying to do internal arts as well, probably just going to kind of be holding both back to a degree. So people have to pick and choose a little bit, but still, yeah, obviously physical fitness is something that's required. And then if people actually integrate and apply the mechanics that I've talked about, it will make the body stronger. It will make the body healthier, but it won't make you more necessarily that fit. And it won't give you really like a chiseled physique or anything of that nature. Um, because health and fitness are not the same thing. People can be very fit but not healthy. People can be very healthy but not fit. They're separate endeavors altogether. And a lot of really fit people are also very unhealthy and vice versa. So, yeah, that's a good question. It's something that people ask quite a lot. But it's really a matter of timing. So, yeah, I mean, balance kind of, yeah, but it's also, you can't have your cake and eat it too. It depends on a person's goals, how serious they want to be about it, how much they really want to transform the inside of their body, and what's more important to them. That's really the key. I wouldn't say balance is really the thing, but whatever. Again, it is case by case basis. Uh, for a complete beginner who has never done anything described in the video, what would be your recommendation? Where would one start? I mean, you can send me a DM on Instagram, and I'll happy to point you in the right direction. Otherwise, I may, like I said, offer private sessions or do online courses to for that specific thing to give beginners and people simple things to do to start dipping their toes in these waters and start getting some of these processes are going. Um, because it's not intuitive, it's not obvious, it's very very counterintuitive and very difficult, and the margin for error is extremely large um, for quite a lot of people, myself included. So yeah, hopefully that gives people or gives everyone watching and tuning in some more of a way in to understand how some of the healing benefits would would be had through the arts. And you'll notice everything I said has nothing to do with movements, has nothing to do with forms, has nothing to do with sets and postures and sequences and lineages and grandmasters and blah 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 blah. It has nothing to do with any of those things. Which I say that because those are all the things people mention. But which is to tie back into my other live stream where people asking how can you tell if a teacher is good or whatever. Personally speaking, it's if they speak about the mechanics and the processes that I talked about in the last live stream and this one, or if they talk about all the things that have nothing to do with those things. Lineage, grandmaster, I studied here, I studied there. Look at my, silk robes. I'm going to play like cool Chinese music, visualization, imagination, cosplay, fantasy, Western anatomy, Western biomechanics, all these other things that people try to grab and pull in and throw together and mix together and create this homogeny of nothing. Quantum physics this and modern science that, and fine, but those things have nothing to do with what the words actually mean. Have you heard of anyone curing thoracic outlet syndrome without surgery? If that means what I think it means, I would say I have done that. Like I used to have carpal tunnel, I guess, where my wrists were extremely painful. And I'm sorry, I hit my mic. And then all this part of my hand and wrist was like really tingly and really quite painful, and had really limited mobility. And my wrist used to, I mean, you can hear it. It's quiet now. But it used to be all crackly and crunchy. Whereas now that's gone. How do you do that? Create space, get the nerves to unbind, get rid of the compression in the compression in this region and then compression in the spine, and it will go away. Surgery, at least in my opinion, won't really do much of anything for it, if not just make it worse and create more problems through scar tissue and other things. So it's really simple. Just get rid of the constriction, get rid of the compression, and then it will go away. It's like if I put a 200-pound weight on your foot, it would hurt. How do you cure your foot of that pain? Remove the 200-pound weight from your foot, probably feel better. So yeah, just create space and create expansion in that region, and it will probably go away. That's it. Which is another way we can create a distinction where if you go online, there'll be like stretches and releases and foam rolling and self massage and these things, which can of course provide some temporary relief, but they don't necessarily create the expansion in that system, in that area, that removes that as a problem in the first place. Sure, they can kind of massage and do whatever, but if the contraction's still there, or the thing which is causing the contraction is still there, then the problem will still persist. So whereas if you change the whole tissue quality to where it's instead of like this, all sad and decrepit and compressed and twisted and distorted, and make it like this, then of course that will create much longer lasting benefits and real changes. Are you still moving to Southeast Asia? I'm not sure about that actually. It's still on my agenda, and maybe I probably will at some point. I just don't know the time frame yet. I'm actually in the process of overhauling my own business while also starting another business. So I'm focusing on those things first, in addition to my own training, and then I will see where I land in terms of moving. And then if I do move, I'll still be available to teach, of course. So I'll still have to run my own businesses and do everything that I've been doing. So yeah, anyways, I think I'll wrap it here. If there's no further questions, I went over everything that I had on my outline, and hopefully this will give, like I said, more clarity. And people, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram if you need further clarification or guidance, or you want personal session, and I can let you know also when I put together a class. It's on my list. I just, like I said, have other business projects on that list as well that I need to take care of. And I'm just also not quite sure what the actual demand is. If I do the course and I put it together and 3 people buy it, it's like, okay, cool. Um, that was fun. I don't know if it was necessarily worth it, but I'm just still trying to decide and see the actual response and interest from the people that are actively following the channel. So yeah, if you tuned in late, I would recommend going back and watching the rest of the stream where I went through the different elemental things and the different processes and broke it down in some degree of detail. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, also too, Hyperion Herbs announcement. Nettle Root is back in stock. Polyragus is back in stock. And I'm doing a sale at the end of the month. Basically from now until September 2nd, 15% off entire order with promo code end of August at hyperionherbs.com, which is my website, my company, in case you don't know. And I have new products in the works as we speak. So should be exciting. Should be good stuff, which is what I just finished my own mushroom latte. And then I think maybe that dried my mouth out a little bit. And that's why I'm choking and having to drink water. So anyways, yeah, if you have questions or you have requests for future live streams, feel free to post them in the comments and I will cover it. Otherwise, if you, again, want a session or want to learn more about the course or whatever, send me a DM on Instagram. But yeah, anyways, thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully this information has been helpful, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are on the planet. Stay safe if you are in the southwest part of the United States because there's hurricanes. I guess also stay safe if you're in the Pacific Northwest where there's fires and all of the other natural disasters that are occurring right now on the planet. So hopefully everyone, I'm assuming because if anyone's on the live stream, they're fine. So let's everyone just stay safe and yeah, enjoy your day and go get some training and some practice in. Minimize, aside from watching my videos, maybe minimize your time on social media and consuming content that might not be useful. And I'll talk to you soon.